Have you ever invested everything in someone, only to find out they were keeping secrets the whole time? I thought I'd found real love with Maddie, until I stumbled onto the truth that left me shattered. It's been a journey of heartbreak, healing, and ultimately, finding my own worth. Here's how I finally let go and learned what real love should be. It was the fall semester at University of Washington in Seattle, and campus life was bustling with energy. The leaves were just starting to turn that perfect shade of orange and red, casting a warm glow over the pathways between classes. I'd been keeping a low profile that year, focusing on coursework and healing from a pretty messy breakup. At 24, I was a little older than most students in my classes, but I had made peace with taking my time after all the twists life had thrown at me. Then, out of nowhere, I met Maddie. I remember the first time we ran into each other. It was early September, a few weeks into the semester. I was sitting in the campus coffee shop, grading some papers for a class I was TAing, when she came over, flashed this big, open smile, and just started talking to me. She was 22, 2 years younger, and had this energy about her that seemed to brighten the whole room. There was no hesitation, no small talk. She just slid into the seat across from me and started telling me about how she'd seen me around campus and thought I looked like someone worth knowing. It was a bold move, and honestly, it was exactly what I needed to pull me out of my slump. Over the next few weeks, we started hanging out regularly. Maddie had this way of weaving herself into my daily routine, like she was already a close friend who had been there for years. She'd text me little things during the day, like coffee break or quick walk between classes. Sometimes, she'd ask for help with something small, borrowing a book, help with a project, or carrying something heavy to her car. It wasn't long before I realized that she genuinely enjoyed spending time with me, and I looked forward to each excuse to see her. One evening, we were walking around the quad, the spot on campus with all those big cherry blossom trees, though by then the blossoms had given way to a carpet of golden leaves. She started opening up about her past, telling me about her last relationship and how it had ended badly. It was complicated, she said with a sigh, her voice tinged with a sadness that didn't quite fit her usually upbeat personality. It left me feeling guarded. But with you, it feels easy to just be myself. It was a strange feeling, hearing someone speak so openly. I had always been the one people came to with their problems, but something about Maddie's vulnerability hit differently. She trusted me, and I started seeing her as more than just a friend. We drifted into a comfortable pattern, and before I knew it, what started as a casual friendship took on a new layer. We weren't together in the traditional sense, but there was this undeniable chemistry between us that made things complicated. We became friends with benefits, and I found myself wanting more. I'd started to hope that maybe, with her, I could leave my own past behind and build something real. But Maddie had a complexity to her that I didn't expect. One moment, she'd be open and affectionate, and the next, distant and guarded. It was like she had these walls up that I couldn't quite get past. I could tell she was interested, but every time things got close to serious, she'd pull away, leaving me wondering what it was that held her back. Looking back, that time was a blur of late-night talks, spontaneous outings, and these little moments that felt like they could turn into something bigger. We'd sit on the campus lawn with takeout, talking about everything from life goals to silly what-if scenarios. She'd laugh, make some joke, and then suddenly get quiet, as if something serious was weighing on her that she couldn't put into words. Even though I wanted a real relationship, the complexity of Maddie's personality kept me guessing. I couldn't tell if she was just scared or if maybe I was chasing after someone who would always keep me at arm's length. After a few months of seeing each other, I knew I wanted more with Maddie. It was the middle of November, and we'd started this easy, comfortable rhythm, spending nearly every free moment together. We'd go out to random diners at midnight, explore Seattle's bookstores and coffee shops, or just take late-night walks along Green Lake, bundled up in sweaters against the crisp autumn air. Being with her felt so natural. I thought we were ready to make things official, so one night I worked up the nerve to ask her to be my girlfriend. I still remember that night clearly. We were sitting on my couch, a pizza box open in front of us, and Maddie was laughing at something ridiculous on TV, her head thrown back, relaxed and carefree. I looked over at her, thinking about how much I wanted this to be more than just casual. So, I took a breath and said, Maddie, I think we're at a point where we could make this official. I'd love for you to be my girlfriend. She looked at me, her expression shifting from surprise to something more guarded. After a pause, she gave me a sad smile and said, I don't know. I just don't think I'm ready for anything too serious. My last relationship, it really hurt. I don't know if I'm up for something that intense again. I forced a smile, not wanting to push her. That's okay. I understand. I'll wait until you're ready. Her eyes softened, and she reached out to hold my hand, squeezing it gently. Thank you for understanding. You're a good guy. I just need some time. Though her answer stung, I told myself it was just a matter of time. We kept spending time together as though nothing had changed. But as we grew closer, Maddie began revealing pieces of herself that left me a little unsettled. I started noticing quirks in her personality, little things that I'd overlooked at first. One night in early December, we were sitting in Elliott Bay Book Company, sipping coffee and flipping through books. Maddie loved coming here, surrounded by the smell of old pages and fresh coffee. We'd browse the aisles, sometimes picking books for each other to read, laughing at random passages, or quietly sharing passages that meant something to us. It felt like the perfect date, until she brought up her ex. It happened so casually, like she didn't even realize she was doing it. We were laughing about a book I'd picked out for her when she said, You know, my ex would have hated this place. He never understood why I love books so much. But you get it. She smiled at me then, and for a moment, it felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But as the days went on, these comparisons didn't stop. We'd be grabbing brunch at Portage Bay Cafe, and she'd casually mention, my ex was more of a bacon and eggs kind of guy, he didn't get the appeal of all this healthy stuff. Or we'd be on a drive along the coast, and she'd bring him up again, almost like she was reminiscing. One evening, we were walking through Pike Place Market on one of those cold, rainy Seattle nights. Maddie wanted to check out some of the small shops tucked between the bustling produce stands and seafood vendors. We wandered into this tiny store that sold vintage postcards and knickknacks, and she immediately started flipping through a box of postcards. These are amazing, she said, holding up a postcard with an old map of Seattle on it. I love places like this. My ex used to think they were a waste of time, but she trailed off, glancing at me with that warm smile I'd come to love. I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me loved that I could be the person who appreciated these things with her, but another part of me wondered why her ex was always in the picture. It was like he was this ghost in our relationship, lingering in every corner of our shared experiences. Later that night, we ended up back at my place, sitting on the couch, a cup of tea in her hands as we unwound from the day. I finally brought it up, trying to keep my voice calm. Maddie, it feels like you bring up your ex a lot. I'm here for you, but sometimes it feels like you're still a bit attached to that relationship. She looked at me, surprised, and then her expression softened. I didn't realize I was doing that. It's just, he was a huge part of my life. It's hard to just forget, you know? I nodded, not wanting to push too hard. I understand. I just want you to know that I'm here to build something real with you, if you're ready for that. She gave me a small, grateful smile, reaching for my hand. Thank you. I appreciate that so much. For a while, it seemed like things were getting better. We kept going out, exploring new spots around the city. We'd go on long drives to Discovery Park, where we'd watch the sunset over the Puget Sound, talking about our dreams and plans. But no matter how many good moments we shared, that sense of distance between us never fully went away. It was around Christmas that I started seeing another side of Maddie, one that left me feeling more confused than ever. We were at a holiday party with some of her friends at a bar downtown. Everything was festive, the room filled with twinkling lights and holiday music. Maddie seemed to be in high spirits, laughing and talking with everyone. At one point, she leaned over and whispered to me, "You know, I'm glad you're here." My ex never liked parties, so I'd always end up going alone. Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. Here we were, together, sharing a night with her friends, and she was still bringing him up. It was like she was trying to remind herself of why she'd chosen me, but every reminder felt like a small jab, a reminder of someone who was never fully gone from her mind. But every time I started to feel that frustration bubble up, she'd look at me with those eyes full of gratitude, and I'd tell myself that this was worth it. I'd keep waiting, keep hoping, that one day she'd let go of her past and choose me completely. I kept holding on, believing that love and patience could be enough to make her see that we could be something real. But as time went on, I wondered if I was trying to love someone who couldn't see me beyond the shadow of her past. After over a year of back and forth, something unexpected happened. Maddie finally agreed to make our relationship official. I remember that day like it was yesterday. It was springtime in Seattle, the air starting to warm up, and the cherry blossoms were in full bloom on campus. We were sitting on a bench in Volunteer Park, taking in the rare sunny day, and I decided to bring up where we stood. I never thought I'd hear you say yes to being exclusive with me, I admitted, unable to keep the smile off my face. You don't know how happy this makes me. Maddie laughed softly but didn't quite meet my eyes. Maybe it's because you're the best guy I've ever dated, she said, her tone almost teasing. I could feel a slight knot forming in my stomach. There was something a little off in her tone, something that felt more like a compliment given out of obligation than genuine excitement. But I brushed it off. I'd waited for this moment, and now that it was here, I didn't want to ruin it by overthinking things. I'd finally become her boyfriend, officially, into me. That was a victory worth celebrating. In the weeks that followed, things between us seemed to change, but not always in the ways I'd imagined. We spent even more time together, going on longer dates and meeting up at all our favorite spots. But I started to notice things I hadn't before, or maybe things I just hadn't let myself see. Maddie had this almost magnetic pull on people, especially guys. It seemed like everywhere we went, there were men who'd come up to say hi or strike up a conversation, lingering just a little too long. One night, we were out with friends at the Pink Door, this Italian restaurant in Pike Place with live jazz music. It was one of our favorite places, and Maddie loved the atmosphere there. Halfway through the night, I left our table to grab us some drinks from the bar. When I came back, Maddie was deep in conversation with a guy I didn't recognize. He was laughing at something she'd said, leaning in closer than felt appropriate. She didn't even notice I'd returned until I cleared my throat. Maddie laughed it off, introducing him as just an old friend from campus. But the way he looked at her made me uneasy. Later that night, I tried to bring it up casually, not wanting to sound controlling. Seems like you know a lot of people around here, I said with a chuckle. That guy was pretty friendly. Maddie just shrugged. Seattle's a small city, she replied, brushing it off. You know how it is. I tried to ignore the feeling gnawing at me. After all, I was her boyfriend now, right? But as the weeks turned into months, situations like that kept happening. Maddie would get texts late at night or run into old friends at bars, people who seemed to know her a little too well. One night, while we were at Rocco's Pizza downtown, she even got a call from someone named Jake, and I remember her stepping away from the table to take it. When she came back, she casually mentioned that he was just an old friend from work who wanted to catch up sometime. I didn't want to come off as jealous or possessive, so I played it cool. But every encounter, every old friend that popped up, chipped away at my confidence. I'd been so happy to finally be Maddie's boyfriend, but the more I observed, the more I started to wonder if she was as invested in this as I was. One evening in early summer, we went on a hike up to Rattlesnake Ledge, a popular trail about an hour outside the city. We'd done this hike a few times before, but that day I'd brought a picnic to surprise her at the top, thinking maybe we could share a quiet moment overlooking the lake and really talk about us. The view was breathtaking, and as we sat there on the cliffside, I felt this urge to bring up some of the doubts I'd been pushing down. So, Maddie, I began, trying to keep my tone light, do you ever feel like you have a lot of, close guy friends? She laughed, rolling her eyes playfully. Oh, come on. I can't help it if I make friends easily. Besides, you're the one I chose, right? It was the answer I wanted to hear, but something about it felt like she was brushing me off again. I nodded, trying to let it go, but part of me couldn't shake the feeling that, even though I was her boyfriend now, there was still this wall between us. Our summer was filled with moments like that. On the surface, everything looked perfect. We'd go to Mariners games at T-Mobile Park, cheering with the crowd, or take weekend trips out to Whidbey Island, spending lazy afternoons on the beach. We even attended a wedding together in early July, and Maddie introduced me to her friends as her boyfriend. I thought that maybe things were finally falling into place. But every now and then, a reminder would pop up, a text she'd receive, or the way she'd bump into old friends who looked at her a bit too admiringly. And each time, I'd feel that familiar pang of insecurity, wondering if I was really the only one she wanted. It all came to a head one night in August. We were out at the Crocodile for a concert, surrounded by music and energy, and everything felt perfect. But as the night went on, I noticed she was distracted, checking her phone a few times more than usual. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to ask her about it. "Is everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "You seem a bit distracted." She glanced at her phone, then shrugged. "Oh, it's nothing. Just a friend texting about some plans this weekend." That answer didn't sit well with me, so I pressed a bit further. "Maddie, it's just, sometimes it feels like there's always someone else. Someone who's a little too close." She sighed, looking a little annoyed. "Why does this bother you so much?" "I'm with you, aren't I?" "Yeah," I said quietly, "but sometimes it feels like I'm just one of many, like I'm filling a role anyone else could step into." There was a long pause, and for the first time, she didn't brush it off. She looked away, her expression unreadable, as if maybe, just maybe, she understood where I was coming from. But instead of answering, she just said, "Let's not ruin tonight, okay?" That conversation stuck with me. I wanted to believe that being her boyfriend meant something real, that I wasn't just someone she'd chosen out of convenience. But as much as I loved Maddie, I was starting to feel like I'd fallen for someone who was never fully there with me. One night, we were hanging out at my place, watching some random Netflix show that neither of us was really paying attention to. Maddie's phone was buzzing with notifications, and at one point, she handed it to me and said, "Hey, can you look up the name of that restaurant we went to last weekend? I want to tell Kayla about it." Without thinking twice, I took her phone and started typing in the search bar. But as I began to type, a notification popped up, a message from someone named Chris. It wasn't anything scandalous at first, just a simple "Hey, loved the pic you sent last night, smiling face with smiling eyes." I figured it was just a friend joking around or maybe someone she'd known before me, so I tried to ignore it. But before I could finish typing, another message came through, this time a photo preview. I stared at the screen, feeling my stomach drop. Curiosity got the best of me, and despite the guilt gnawing at me, I tapped on the message. What I saw hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a conversation between Maddie and this guy, Chris. And right there, in the middle of the chat, were photos she had sent him, ones I'd never seen before. There was something deeply personal about them, images that she'd clearly taken with care, meant only for someone she trusted. And in that moment, I realized that person wasn't me. My hands felt numb, and I quickly put her phone down, my heart pounding in my chest. Maddie was still sitting beside me, completely oblivious, laughing at something on the TV. For a second, I considered just keeping quiet, pretending I hadn't seen anything. But the betrayal I felt was too much to ignore. "Maddie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced over, noticing the tension in my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. I took a deep breath, holding up her phone. "Who's Chris? And why are you sending him these pictures?" She looked at the phone, then back at me, an unreadable expression crossing her face. Then she just shrugged, as if it was nothing, like she'd forgotten a minor detail. "It's not a big deal. It was just a joke, okay? I haven't even met him in person. It's harmless." "Harmless?" I felt my voice shake, the anger and hurt boiling over. You don't think this is a betrayal? Sending photos like that to another guy? Maddie sighed, looking more annoyed than remorseful. You're being too serious about this. I thought you loved me. Isn't that enough? I'm still here with you, aren't I? I didn't know what to say. Her reaction felt like another blow, like she couldn't see the damage this had done. She was brushing it off, making it seem like I was the one being unreasonable for feeling hurt. The fact that she didn't even apologize, didn't show any sign of regret, just left me feeling more hollow. For a long time, I sat there, numb, not knowing how to react. Part of me wanted to walk out, to just end things then and there. But another part of me, one that had held on to earth through all the ups and downs, all the moments of doubt, couldn't let go. I told myself it was just a mistake, something we could work through. I loved Maddie too much to throw everything away over one incident, even if that incident left me feeling more alone than ever. After that night, things between us were never quite the same. I tried to forgive her, to act like it hadn't happened, but the trust was cracked. Every time her phone buzzed or she'd mention going out with friends, I'd feel that same pang of doubt, that feeling that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't enough for her. I wanted to believe that she cared for me, that I was the one she truly wanted. But as the weeks went by, it felt like that belief was slipping through my fingers, no matter how hard I tried to hold on. One night in late September, we were out to dinner at Ray's Boathouse on the waterfront. It was one of those rare evenings when we both had the time to slow down, enjoy a meal, and catch up. The place was perfect, dimly lit, with a view of the boats rocking gently on Puget Sound, the Seattle skyline twinkling in the distance. We'd just gotten our food when her phone buzzed. She glanced down and, almost instinctively, started typing a reply, smiling to herself. I tried to brush it off, but curiosity got the better of me. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my tone as casual as I could manage. She didn't even look up. "Oh, just a new friend," she said with a shrug, still tapping away on her screen. I forced a chuckle, but something in me started to feel unsettled. "A new friend? Do you still talk to other guys regularly?" She finally looked up, giving me this half-amused, half-challenging look. "What's the big deal? You're my boyfriend, right? Don't you trust me?" It was a strange feeling, like I was being called out for being insecure. I nodded, trying to shake off the unease, but the interaction stuck with me. As much as I wanted to believe her, something in her tone, that slight smirk on her face, made me feel like she was hiding something. But I told myself to let it go, that I was probably just overreacting. As the weeks went by, those small moments turned into a pattern I couldn't ignore. We'd be at a friend's gathering, maybe having drinks at the Pine Box, a bar we both loved. Halfway through the evening, her phone would buzz, and she'd excuse herself to the corner to answer a message or take a quick call. If I asked about it, she'd just wave me off, saying, "Oh, it's just someone from work, or just a friend, relax." But relaxing was the last thing I felt. There was this growing sense of distance between us, like we were sharing space but living in different worlds. I'd catch myself wondering, who's really on the other end of those messages? I started feeling paranoid in ways I'd never felt before, like I was tiptoeing around in my own relationship, afraid to ask too much, afraid of what I might hear. One weekend, we took a day trip out to Snoqualmie Falls, hoping to get away from everything and just enjoy the outdoors. We'd packed a lunch and brought a couple of blankets, planning to sit out by the falls and take in the view. But even there, in the middle of nature with nothing but the sound of the water crashing below, Maddie couldn't seem to stay off her phone. "Hey, Maddie," I said, trying to sound lighthearted, "think you can put the phone down for a few hours? It's not every day we're out here, you know?" She gave me this look, almost as if I'd insulted her. "What's your problem?" she snapped. "Just because I'm texting doesn't mean I'm ignoring you." It was like there was a wall between us, one I couldn't seem to break through no matter how hard I tried. I was her boyfriend, but half the time, it felt like I was competing for her attention with people I didn't even know. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding something back, that there were parts of her life she didn't want me to see. One night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat in the living room alone, replaying everything in my head. The friends, the secretive texts, the little smiles she'd flash at her screen when she thought I wasn't looking. I wanted to bring it up, to have an open conversation about what was really going on, but every time I tried, she'd either get defensive or turn it back on me, making me feel like I was overthinking things. And honestly, maybe I was. I didn't want to be that jealous, controlling boyfriend who couldn't trust his partner. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore that something felt off. There were cracks forming in our relationship, subtle but persistent, like tiny fractures in a foundation that only grew with time. It was a quiet Thursday night, and Maddie and I were having dinner at Serafina, this little Italian spot we loved in Seattle. The place had that warm, intimate vibe, with dim lights and candles on the tables. We'd just ordered our pasta, and I was caught up in how nice it felt, just the two of us, sharing a meal. That was when Maddie looked across the table, her face calm, and dropped a bombshell. "Hey," she started, her voice casual, almost like she was just suggesting we go to a different restaurant. "I've been thinking, I think I want a little more space. I don't really want something too serious right now. Maybe we could go back to just dating casually, no strings attached." At first, I thought I'd misheard her. I stared at her, trying to make sense of what she'd just said, as if repeating it in my head would somehow make it sound better. "Wait, what do you mean, no strings attached? I thought we were in an actual relationship here." She looked back at me, still calm, her expression almost sympathetic. "I know, but I've been thinking a lot. I guess I just don't feel ready for anything too serious. I like being with you, but I also want to have the freedom to meet other people, no commitment, just having fun." It was like a punch to the gut. All the time we'd spent together, all the moments that had made me think we were moving towards something real, something lasting, suddenly, it felt like none of that mattered. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "So, let me get this straight. You want to keep seeing me, but you also want to date other people?" She nodded, almost cheerfully. "Yes, exactly. I have a lot of friends, you know that. It's not a big deal, just friends. I don't see why it has to be exclusive." I could feel my heart pounding, hurt and disbelief mixing into a kind of numbness. "Maddie, that sounds like you want to have me around, but you also want to keep your options open. Do you realize how that sounds?" She tilted her head, flashing that familiar smile, the one that had drawn me in so many times before. "You don't need to worry, though. I care about you. You're the one I come back to." The words sounded reassuring, but the meaning was hollow. She was asking me to stay while she kept a foot out the door, and I knew deep down that it wasn't fair. But as much as I wanted to say no, to tell her I couldn't do it, I found myself nodding. Maybe it was hope, or maybe just a stubborn belief that, with time, she'd see I was the one who truly cared about her. I told myself I'd wait it out, that she'd eventually realize I was worth choosing fully. But things only got harder from there. Every time we went out, I found myself wondering who else she was talking to, what other connections she was keeping. One weekend, she mentioned meeting up with friends, and all I could think about was whether friends actually meant someone else she was interested in. I tried to keep my doubts to myself, but the feeling of being second place gnawed at me, making every conversation, every night out, feel tense. Over the next few weeks, the cracks in our relationship kept widening. Maddie's texts would sometimes come late at night, casually mentioning dinners or outings with friends I had never heard of. She'd laugh it off, acting like it was nothing, but to me, it felt like she was slipping further away, like I was just one of many people she was keeping in her life. One night, we were sitting on her couch, a movie playing on the screen, but neither of us was really watching. Out of nowhere, she asked, "You're okay with this, right? I mean, I want you to be happy too. You could see other people if you wanted." It was strange, hearing her say that. I had no interest in anyone else, I was committed to her. I looked at her, trying to understand. "But Maddie, that's not what I want. I'm with you because I want to be with you, not anyone else." She sighed, like my answer disappointed her somehow. "I just want us to have freedom, that's all. No pressure, no rules." Isn't that the best way? Sitting there, I realized we wanted different things. She was content with keeping things light, never diving too deep, while I wanted something real, something with roots. But I kept hoping, thinking that maybe, one day, she'd realize I was the one who'd been there for her, who'd stayed, even when it hurt. Looking back, I don't know why I kept waiting. During those months of secret dating, things went from confusing to downright painful. Maddie would go on dates with other guys and then casually mention them to me, as if it was just a normal part of our relationship. She'd bring it up in passing, over coffee at Vivace Roasters or during a lazy Sunday walk through Capitol Hill, as if the details wouldn't bother me. One evening, she told me about a date she'd had the night before. We were sitting in her living room, the evening light fading as she casually recounted the whole evening, laughing about the guy's awkward jokes, mentioning how he tried too hard. "Don't worry, though," she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "He's nothing like you. You're the one I trust, the one I come home to." I tried to let her words comfort me, to focus on the fact that she was choosing me over these random dates. But as time went on, those reassurances started to feel hollow, like they were only meant to keep me around. The more I tried to ignore my discomfort, the clearer it became that I was caught in a strange loop where I was constantly trying to prove my worth to her. One night, things came to a head. We were out at Cary Park, sitting on a bench overlooking the city lights. It was a place we both loved, and we'd had some of our best conversations there. I wanted to bring up how I was feeling, to somehow get her to see how painful it was for me to sit by and watch her explore other options. But before I could even start, she brought up a recent date, another guy she'd met at a mutual friend's party. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Maddie, do you even realize how hard this is for me?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Hearing about these guys, pretending like it doesn't hurt?" She looked at me, almost amused. "Come on, you know you're still my favorite. None of them even come close to you." "But that's not the point," I replied, my frustration finally breaking through. "I don't want to be the favorite in a lineup of guys. I thought we had something real." She sighed, rolling her eyes a little, as if I was being dramatic. "Look, you're acting like I'm forcing you to be here. If this doesn't work for you, maybe we need to reconsider things." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. I felt like I was constantly competing, trying to prove I was the best choice, the one who'd always be there. And somehow, in her way, she was letting me know that I was expendable. I looked down, swallowing the frustration and hurt that threatened to spill over. "Maddie, you know how much I care about you. I just wish you'd see that I'm here, that I'm all in." She gave a slight smile, almost as if she was amused by my reaction. "You don't need to worry. If someone else was better, I'd be with them, wouldn't I?" It was like I'd been reduced to a backup option, someone she kept around not out of love, but out of convenience. She'd mastered this dance of pulling me in just close enough to keep me hopeful, then pushing me away whenever I got too close or questioned her choices. And every time I started to doubt myself, she'd find a way to make it seem like it was my issue, that I was the one being insecure or overly possessive. As the weeks went by, I started noticing how much of myself I'd lost. I'd become someone who constantly worried about her approval, who held back his own feelings just to keep her around. I was sacrificing my self-respect, letting her dictate the rules of our relationship, all while clinging to this hope that maybe one day, she'd choose me completely. But deep down, I was starting to see the truth. I was the only one truly invested in us, and Maddie knew that all too well. It was late on a Wednesday night, sometime in October. The city had already slipped into that cold, damp fall weather Seattle's known for. Maddie and I were sitting in her apartment, just talking about random things. I was under the impression that we were still figuring things out, that maybe we'd finally work toward something steady. But out of nowhere, she looked at me with a strange, detached expression and dropped the bomb. "Look, I've been thinking about us," she started, her voice calm but oddly final. "I think it's time we go our separate ways. We're just not right for each other." I felt like the floor had dropped out beneath me. "What? Maddie, what are you talking about?" I stammered, trying to make sense of what she was saying. What about everything we've been through, all those talks about a future together? She sighed, looking almost exasperated, like she was explaining something simple. You're a good guy, you really are. But I've realized that I don't see you in my future, not in the way you want to be there. I never thought of you as the one, you know? I never really saw you as my husband. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, each one slicing through any hope I'd been holding on to. You never thought of me like that? But Maddie, we've spent so much time together. You said you wanted a future with me. She gave a small, almost dismissive smile, shrugging slightly. People change, you know? Sometimes, you realize that what you thought you wanted wasn't really it after all. I think we were just in a phase in each other's lives. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All the ups and downs, the times I'd convinced myself to stay and fight for us, every moment of doubt I'd pushed aside to make things work, it all felt meaningless. I tried to find the words, anything to make her see how much this hurt, but nothing came out. Sitting there in silence, it dawned on me that Maddie had made her choice, that this wasn't some impulsive decision. She was telling me, in her own calm, detached way, that she'd moved on emotionally long before she'd worked up the nerve to say it out loud. After a long silence, I finally nodded, more for myself than for her. I get it, Maddie. I wish you'd told me sooner. She just looked at me, not even offering an apology, like she thought I'd somehow understand her perspective. I stood up, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted but at the cost of something I'd once held dear. Walking out of her apartment that night, I felt the emptiness settle in, like the city around me had grown colder and lonelier. I'd spent so long trying to keep things together, convincing myself that if I just waited a little longer, Maddie would finally choose me. But now, it was clear that the only person holding on was me. As I left, I realized I didn't need any more explanations or closure from her. The truth was simple and hard, Maddie had never been as invested as I was. And while it hurt, it was a clean break that I finally, reluctantly, accepted. A few months after our breakup, I was finally starting to find my footing again. I'd spent weeks replaying our last conversation, dissecting every word she'd said, trying to make sense of how we'd gone from talking about the future to her coldly telling me she never saw me as the one. I'd convinced myself to move on, or at least try to, with the hope that one day I'd understand her reasons. Then, one evening, I got a call from an old friend, Jamie, who knew both Maddie and me from college. We hadn't talked much since the breakup, so I figured he was just checking in. But after some small talk, he hit me with a piece of news I wasn't expecting. Hey, so... I didn't know how to tell you this, Jamie started, his tone hesitant. I thought you might hear it from someone else, but... Maddie just got engaged. I saw the post on social media. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Engaged? I managed, trying to process what he was saying. To who? We broke up only a few months ago. Jamie hesitated, like he didn't want to make it worse. I didn't know the guy, but he was at some parties around campus last year. Apparently, they've been together for a while. Some people said he'd been around even while you two were still dating. Hearing those words was like a slap to the face. All the moments Maddie had told me I was overreacting, all the times she'd reassured me that I was the one she was choosing, they all came flooding back, but now they felt empty. It was as if every memory we'd built had been tainted by this hidden truth. I thanked Jamie for telling me and ended the call, sitting alone in my living room, trying to make sense of it all. The anger and hurt hit me in waves, stronger than anything I'd felt when she'd first left. I'd spent so much time questioning myself, wondering if I'd been too insecure, too needy. But the reality was that she'd been with someone else all along, keeping me around as a backup while she figured out her next move. Days later, I saw her engagement post myself. There she was, standing next to him with that same easy smile I'd fallen for, her hand proudly showing off the ring. The caption read something like, "Can't wait to spend forever with my best friend," and the comments were flooded with congratulations from people who'd had no idea what was really going on. Looking at that picture, I finally saw Maddie for who she was, someone who'd never truly cared about me, someone who'd used my love and patience as a way to pass the time until she found something better. I'd given her my heart, my trust, and my time, and she'd taken it all without a second thought, only to move on like I'd never mattered. It hurt, knowing that everything I'd felt, everything I'd sacrificed, was meaningless to her. But as painful as it was, that truth was what finally set me free. I could let go, knowing that the person I'd loved was never truly who I thought she was. About 6 months after everything fell apart, I got an invitation to a friend's wedding out in Portland. It felt like a fresh start. I'd finally started to put the pieces back together, focusing on myself and leaving all the pain and confusion with Maddie behind me. The wedding was set in this beautiful old barn in the countryside, with fairy lights strung up and flowers everywhere. The vibe was perfect, and I felt ready to enjoy the evening, catching up with friends I hadn't seen in ages. I was deep in conversation with some friends near the open bar, sharing laughs and swapping old stories, when a familiar voice cut through the crowd. Turning around, I saw Maddie walking in, her arm linked with her new husband's. She looked almost exactly the same as when we were together, confident, poised, that same bright smile that I used to think was just for me. But now, seeing her laughing, glowing beside someone else, I felt something different, a sense of detachment I hadn't expected. As soon as she spotted me, she made a beeline over, her husband in tow. "Oh my gosh," she exclaimed, putting on that overly friendly tone that felt almost rehearsed. "It's so good to see you." She flashed that smile, the one I used to think held some deeper meaning. I just nodded, trying to keep things civil. "Hey, Maddie. Good to see you too." She reached over, pulling her husband forward. "I want you two to meet. This is my husband, Tom. Tom, this is, well, an old friend." It took every ounce of self-control to stay polite. I shook his hand, looking at him briefly before meeting Maddie's gaze. "Congrats to you both," I said, managing to keep my tone steady. "I'm glad you're happy. Wishing you all the best." Her smile didn't falter for a second, and it struck me just how unaffected she seemed by everything we'd been through. "Thank you," she replied, her tone sweet as ever. "I'm really glad to see you doing well too." As she turned away, arm in arm with her husband, something inside me finally clicked. I didn't feel the heartache or anger I'd expected. Instead, there was a surprising sense of clarity. All the love, the hurt, the time I'd spent second-guessing myself, it suddenly seemed like a distant memory, something that belonged to a different person. Watching her walk away, I knew I was truly done. The version of Maddie I'd built up in my mind, the one I'd loved so completely, was just that, a version. I realized that I had spent so much time clinging to an idea of who she was, hoping she'd come to value what we'd had, but she was never going to be that person. Leaving the wedding that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time since everything had ended, I knew I was finally free. I wasn't leaving with any bitterness or regret, just the quiet, undeniable knowledge that I'd been right to move on. In that moment, I knew that I deserved someone who saw my worth from the beginning, someone who'd choose me fully, without hesitation or games. And as I drove back home, watching the city lights blur in the distance, I felt a peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was as though I'd been carrying a weight that was finally lifted. Driving home from the wedding that night, I found myself drifting back through all the moments Maddie and I had shared. The laughter, the quiet nights, the road trips, even the tough conversations that had once left me questioning myself. I could remember it all so clearly, but it felt like I was watching someone else's story, a younger, more naive version of myself who had yet to realize what real love looked like. At one point, I pulled over at a small overlook near Lake Union, a place Maddie and I used to go sometimes to talk and watch the city lights. Standing there, looking out over the water, I felt an unexpected calm. I could finally see how much I'd grown since those days. The ache I used to feel, the disappointment, even the frustration, those feelings had faded, replaced by something that felt a lot like gratitude. I'd spent so much time trying to be what she needed, bending myself to fit her idea of love, not realizing that I was losing pieces of myself in the process. But now, I could see it all with such clarity. Maddie hadn't been my person, but that didn't mean I hadn't learned something invaluable from our time together. She'd shown me my own capacity to love, my loyalty, and my willingness to commit fully. I'd given her everything I had, and though it hadn't been enough for her, it had been more than enough for me. I could walk away knowing that I'd done my best. Looking back on those years, I felt an odd sense of closure. It was as though Maddie's chapter in my life had finally come to an end, and I could close the book without any lingering what-ifs. She'd moved on, found her path, and I was finally ready to find mine, one that wouldn't involve compromising my own happiness for someone else's expectations. That night, as I stood by the lake, I felt the weight of it all lift from my shoulders. I took one last look at the water reflecting the city lights and whispered a quiet thank you to the past. Thank you for the lessons, the memories, even the heartbreak. Thank you for showing me what I'm capable of and, most importantly, for teaching me what I truly deserve. By the time I got back in my car, I felt lighter, as if I'd left behind everything I no longer needed. Maddie had moved forward, and now so had I. And as I drove away from the lake, with the city fading in my rearview mirror, I felt ready for new beginnings, for a future that was truly mine. For the first time, I was at peace, filled with gratitude for the past and excitement for what lay ahead.